Bismillah, Assalamu alaikum, and hello everybody. Today is my second video, and I want to talk to you today about belief and disbelief, or faith and disbelief, and what disbelief actually entails. Because I feel like there's a big situation, and the word for disbelief in Arabic is not disbelief; it's actually kufr. It means ingratitude. It means to be ungrateful, and it's related to disbelieving. But I want to really tackle this issue because people, they have a misconception about what disbelief is in modern society, when they think, why would it be bad to not believe in something? Why does that make me bad? And like, I want to actually describe today more or less what disbelief, what it means to actually, you know, to reject a revelation from God when it becomes apparent to you that it's true. Because it's not as simple as a static thing, someone who just doesn't believe something. The idea of what kufr is, or disbelief is, in Islam, is to actually reject, from my perspective, is to reject truth when it comes to you. It's when something becomes apparently true and you turn away from it because you have an agenda greater than the truth. So I want to talk today about disbelief and belief. And I don't really have a character in mind to talk to you about belief with. Maybe I'll mention some of the prophets. But I do have a character to talk about disbelief, or kufr, ingratitude and rejection. It means ingratitude and rejection. So the one I wanted to talk about was the Pharaoh. We don't know his name, but I think it was Ramses something, if they go into historically. But it's or we call it Arabic Fir'aun, or Pharaoh. His name is not mentioned in the Quran, but they did the historical dating. I think it's Ramses something. I don't know which one, but. So, Firaun, he was before I describe what the actual disbelief entails, I want to give an example of someone who was basically someone who was the epitome of someone who rejected faith when it became so apparent to him, and how far he had to go before actually he was punished. Because the people, I'll get into it. So, Firaun was someone who had a lot of power on the earth. He was a pharaoh. And he basically, living in Egypt at the time, was a group of people related to Abraham, and they were related to Jacob, who was his name is Israel, and Jacob Yaqub. And basically they were the children of the prophets, and they knew about this God, the God of Abraham, the God that Muslims worship too. They knew about this God because of that. And these people, Firaun, or Pharaoh, for whatever reason, he decided he was going to subjugate this population. He decided that they were living in Egypt at the time, and he decided, we're going to take these people and we're going to enslave them, and we're going to use them to do labor for us, and and then eventually he started killing their male children. He started when the males were born, they would kill their male children and basically leave the females alive, and Allahu Alam, God knows best what he was doing with them. But he was, at a certain point, he was going to start killing their male children. And so what happened is these people were the people of God at the time. They were the people who believed in the God of Abraham. And God decided to send a messenger or a prophet from amongst these people to preach to Pharaoh and to tell him to basically leave them alone and make it stop. And actually, the way it happened was, I believe it was 1 year the Pharaoh would kill the male children, and the next year he would let them live. So on the year that he was going to kill the male children, the mother of Moses was giving birth, and God inspired her, because they were going to kill the child, to put the child in a basket and put it down the river, and it landed, and actually it landed at the Pharaoh's doorstep. And the Pharaoh's wife was actually a good woman, and she basically took the child and told the Pharaoh, okay, we will take this as a newborn, as a child for us. And they raised him, and somehow the story is not given great detail, but he came to know his God, the God of his forefathers, even though he was living with the Pharaoh. And he had a sense of justice, and something happened in the city, a dispute between some of an Egyptian and one of the children of Israel, and they were fighting, and Moses assisted the children of Israel, the person who was being oppressed, the people being oppressed. He assisted him, and the he punched the Egyptian, and he killed him. He ended up killing him, and then the Pharaoh found out that his allegiances were not to the Egyptians anymore, and even though he was his adopted son, he decided he was going to send to kill him. So Moses ran away, and he went to a different city, and he escaped, and he got chosen as a prophet at some point after that, as a messenger, and God sent him back to Pharaoh to tell him to let the people of God go. They're being oppressed by him, and he was sent as a messenger to Pharaoh to tell him, these are God's people, and you need to let them go. You stop oppressing them. And Pharaoh, part of the Pharaoh's belief was that he was God. There was no God except for him. He actually believed he was God himself. And so when Moses came back after these years and said, listen, I'm a messenger of God, Pharaoh was like, I don't know of any God except for me. Who are you talking about? What God? He said, the God of the Hebrews, the God of the children of Israel, and so now God gave Moses this message and said, like, I'm going to give you signs, I'm going to give you evidences and proofs to show that this message is true, so the Pharaoh, maybe he will fear God and maybe he will obey you. And he actually, so that was the idea. He gave him evidences and proofs to bring to Pharaoh, for Pharaoh to stop being so arrogant and stop oppressing these people and to fear God and obey the command. And so he sent him with 9 proofs, with 9 different signs that came to prove that this is a message from God and that he has to obey. And it wasn't until Pharaoh actually disobeyed, like didn't believe in the last sign, that he ended up getting destroyed. So Pharaoh was presented with 9 signs. The first sign that came, Moses showed him that his staff had turned into a snake in front of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said it was magic, and he said he will produce magic like it. And basically, magicians came from Pharaoh and said, we can do like this, and Moses proved that his was not a trick and theirs was a trick. And I believe the next sign that came, Pharaoh still rejected it. The next sign was Moses turned the river into blood, and Pharaoh still rejected it. And then afterwards, what happened was plagues started to come. So the signs started coming in the form of plagues. So what happened was, every time a plague came from God on Pharaoh, Pharaoh went to Moses and said, oh Moses, we believe now, like me and the Egyptians, we believe. Pray to your God to make this plague stop, and then we're gonna let the children of Israel go, and we're gonna stop this oppression. And so he said, like, I believe in this. And then Moses went, he prayed to God, he said, God, make this stop upon them, and he did. It stopped, and then as immediately they said, no, we're not gonna let them go. This is just a coincidence or whatever. They made an excuse. They said, this is just nonsense. This is just magic. And he excused himself from keeping his promise, and he continued to oppress the children of Israel. So at this point, sign after sign has come to him, making it very, very, very apparent that this is not magic and this is from God. And God is telling him that this is the command, and if you don't obey it, you're going to have a problem. And Pharaoh was determined. It didn't matter how many signs God sent him. He would even fear for a second and beg Moses to stop the torture, and then he would immediately break his word. And that is the state of what disbelief is. It's like being presented with an evidence so clear and the truth becoming clear to you, and you have a desire or an arrogance, something that you don't like about God or what God's telling you, or that makes you not want to believe in him and not want to accept what he's telling you. So it wasn't like Pharaoh was just standing there. He didn't believe in God and then he suffered. No, he was like a messenger came to him, told him about God, proved to him that it's from God, and then Pharaoh continually broke his word and lied. And then eventually what happened was, I believe the last plague, it was that God took the firstborn sons of all the Egyptians, and he spared the Israelites. So then the Pharaoh, he it might have been something else, but I think that's what it was. And then Pharaoh basically, he said, okay, now we're gonna let the children of Israel go. Too much has happened. This is too much. We're gonna let them go. So he let them go, and then he thought about what he did. He said, oh, I let these children of Israel, or he basically, I don't know if he let them go. Maybe he basically, like, I know God inspired Moses to tell him to take the children of Israel and leave, and Pharaoh came to his people and said, I don't know of any God except for me. Like even after all these terrible things happened, Pharaoh basically said, no, like this Moses is nothing. He's just an insignificant person who can't make himself clear. This all these signs that are coming to us are just magic and coincidences. I don't know of any God other than me. And he decided, and then Allah said in the Quran, he said, and then when he gathered his people and said that there's no God but me, he angered God, and God did away with him. So Pharaoh came after Moses and the children of Israel and chased them as they escaped during the night. And Pharaoh traveled, and then he saw another sign. SubhanAllah, they ended up in front of the ocean, and the sea, it split in front of all of them. And the Israelites went across the sea, and to make a passage for them. And Pharaoh, instead of just being like, man, what am I doing? Like, God is clearly telling us that he just still went after them. The ocean drowned Pharaoh, and just as Pharaoh was about to die, he said, I believe in the God of Moses and I submit to him. At the last second before he was dying, I repent. Just before he died, and God said, "You like, this is a joke. Like, you were just so confident in yourself and so arrogant just before this." And he destroyed him. And it says in the Quran, this person is someone who's in hell forever. One of the worst punishments is for him and his people. So this person, this is the example of a disbeliever, of a kafir, of an ungrateful person, and of a person who rejects the evidence that God is telling you something, or that God, this is God, and this is who God is, and this is who His prophets are, and this is what He expects from you, comes to you, and you have something more important to you than the truth. And the thing is, it became so clear for this particular individual. God gave him so many chances to turn back and send him plagues and signs, and he continued in his arrogance. And that's the point. The point is that people who are kafirs, who are rejectors, people who are determined to reject, they're not. And I'm going to get into this later, but the person who's determined to reject, it doesn't matter what you show them, they're going to insist on it. So I'm not going to say every person who's not a Muslim walking around is necessarily a kafir or a disbeliever. Maybe they just haven't been shown who God is, or shown the truth perfectly and in a well enough way. The thing that makes you a kafir is when evidence of who God is and what He's expecting from you comes to you, and you have an agenda greater than that. And Pharaoh is the example of that. He was shown every evidence, and it didn't matter. He still was determined to do what he was going to do, and it took a lot, but eventually God got fed up and He ended him. And that's so the thing about kufr, about disbelief, about rejection, it's the idea is that it's in conflict with reality. So the idea is that if you send someone, a lot of people believe in God. A lot of people believe in God, but to believe in God is to believe in who God is as well. Because you might have a relationship with God your whole life, however you have with Him, and I'm not discounting that or saying that's not true. But the Islamic message is basically, that Allah had chosen particular people as prophets and messengers, and He, gave descriptions of Himself to them and of the commands He wanted from humanity. And when those messengers come to you, or when their books and revelations come to you, He left evidences within them to show that this is from Him. And when they come to you, and then now you're being presented with the opportunity, now I'm going to believe in God for who He is. Because I see this evidence as God, I've been worshiping my whole life, the Creator, or I haven't, maybe you haven't. But this evidence comes to you, this book, and it tells you, it describes God to you, and it gives evidences for why this is true. And then now you are confronted to believe in God for who He is, and to believe in Him for who He is, and accept what He has decreed upon you. So God gave commands. I accept these are the commands for me, and I believe in Him for who He says He is. Because if when you're confronted with the truth about God, and you decide, no, I don't want that, and you keep worshiping God your own way, I mean, if it's been made clear that it's the truth, now you're worshiping the God of your mind, because God has a character, and He has expectations from people, and this is, to accept Him for who He is, and to worship Him for who He is, and not for who you want Him to be, is the idea of what real belief and faith is. And I'm not going to go too deep into a lot of evidences for Islam being the 100% truth from God in this video. I'm going to go into podcast form after this video, inshallah, with my friend, and we're going to talk about some of those things. But what I will say is that, like, I'm gonna talk about what Islam is at least, and I'm gonna talk about, like, you know, what its relationship is to the other Abrahamic faiths, Christianity and Judaism, and where they split off, inshallah. And I wanted, so people know what Islam is, because maybe some people don't really understand what the message of Islam is, or what it's saying, or where it where it comes in similarity with Christianity and Judaism. And another thing I wanted to talk about was that there is like a liberal and a conservative interpretation about what disbelief is. Some people say, like some people would say everyone who's walking the street who is not like who doesn't believe in Islam, they're just a kafir and they're going to hell. I don't necessarily agree with that. I would say that people, and some people will say no, even if you find that this is the truth and you reject it and you just be a good person, you're going to go to heaven. And I don't agree with that either. I'm somewhere in the middle. I say, God deals with everyone in their own way, but once it becomes clear to you that the truth of who God is, and that this is the way that He wants you to worship, and this is who He is, and if you turn away at that point, you're held accountable. So, yeah. One second. So I want to talk about the difference between Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, and basically what we believe about God. And yeah, so the beginning of our religion, where we call him the father of our religion, is not the beginning. It was before that there were prophets too, but the father of religion is Abraham. And Muslims, Christians, and Jews all agree that Abraham was a prophet from God and was, someone who God called his friend, and God made a covenant with Abraham. And before him there was Noah, and there was the first man that was created, that was Adam. But basically, the belief of Muslims, Christians, and Jews is that basically God, the way that He inspired people to know Him, because He put us here. It's not like God's talking from the sky to us. So if there is a God and He put us here and He has a purpose for us, it's reasonable to assume that He put us here and He gave us some way to understand what He expects from us. And it's not just left up to our imaginations. So the Muslim, the Christian, and the Jewish idea is that basically God, put us here, and He sent prophets to people, and He sent them with evidences, and He sent them with signs, and He sent them with scriptures, and those scriptures described who God is and described what He wants for the nations, for the people. And there was a man named Abraham, and he was tested by God extensively, very, very severely. And God, after he passed those tests, God put the prophethood in his bloodline, and all the prophets afterwards came from his bloodline. And that's where the Jews are basically descendants of Abraham from one of his sons. And the prophets came in his bloodline from him up until Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who actually was sent from the other son of Abraham. So the Jews had prophets like Joseph, like Moses, like Jonah, like Job. These people were people God inspired, and they were talking about their God. They were saying, my God is the God of Abraham, the God who sent Noah, and the God who created Adam. And they continued to say, this is who God is, and God commanded us to abide by these laws. And he gave laws for the different nations that they came to. So they came and they gave laws, and they told, this is who God is, this is what He expects from us. And prophets continued to come from talking about this same God over and over again for generations, within time spans of each other. The most, I think, was 600 years between prophets, and that was between Jesus and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But prophets continued to come from this line and said, this is our God, this is who God is, and they continued to preach about this God. And they brought scriptures and books describing God and describing their rules. And the idea is that God made it clear with these prophets and with these scriptures that this is who He is. And then eventually it came, and a prophet came. His name was Isa, or Jesus. And this is where the Muslims and Christians and Jews split off. So Jesus came, and He basically preached a message about God and about worshiping God, and and he gave there was a prophet promised in the Jewish scriptures called the Messiah, and Jesus was basically the Messiah. He fulfilled that prophecy. And the Jews basically said, no, this guy, he's lying. Basically, they said he's not telling the truth. and we don't believe this is the Messiah. So the Jews now are still waiting for the Messiah to come. So the Christians basically said, no, we believe in this person's message. He was telling the truth. And the Christians basically believed in Jesus as the Messiah, and they followed his teachings as well as the teachings of all the other prophets from that line. Where the Jews said, no, we believe in all the prophets, but we don't believe in Jesus. We believe this man was lying about being a prophet of God. And the Christians actually also worshipped him. They said that he was God and he was the Son of God, but they basically believed that what he said was true. And then 600 years after Jesus, there was a man named Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he came and he came as a messenger, and he said, actually, yes, Jesus was a messenger, and he was the Messiah, and the Jews were wrong for rejecting him. And I'm a messenger and I'm a prophet too, and I'm the last prophet that's going to come. And I am also related to Abraham. Basically, he said he's from the bloodline of one of Abraham's sons, and he preached his message was a message for all of humanity, because he preached his message. He was given a book, the Quran, and it was given as a detailed revelation about God and about the commands he has for mankind from that point on. Now, the place where Christians and Muslims split off, first of all, Christians didn't believe Prophet Muhammad was a prophet. They said the same thing the Jews said about Jesus about him. They said he's not telling the truth. And also, the Muslims said basically this is where the real difference comes. Muslims believe that the Christians and the Jews, their books are not in their original form. So we believe as Muslims that the Bible and the old scriptures of the former prophets, they have some truth in them, but people change them over time. And we also believe specifically about Jesus that people changed what they said about Jesus, and they made him into a God and the Son of God when he only claimed to be a prophet and a messenger and the Messiah. And the Muslims basically said, because Prophet Muhammad came and he came with a book, the Quran, and our belief as Muslims is that because this is the last prophet and the last scripture that's going to be given, that this book was kept in its completely integral form and it wasn't changed at all. The Quran was kept perfect. And from that point on till the end of time, if people wanted to know who the God of Abraham was and the God of these prophets were, they would have a very clear and a clear understanding of who he is and what he expects from people. And that's what the purpose of the Quran, and it also cleared up some of the misconceptions that came because of the people changing the past scriptures. So the Quran, basically the proof of the Quran's statement is that Jesus was a messenger of God, and that the Jews were wrong for rejecting him, but after he came, people started saying he was the Son of God and God himself, and that's not true. And also it talks about the previous scriptures of the Jews, where they also made some changes to their books. People rewrote them, and the idea is that if you want to know the God of Abraham, the God of all these prophets, who he sent continual prophet after prophet talking about him, then the way to know him is to come to Islam and to read the Quran and to listen to what Prophet Muhammad said, because he was a prophet of that God, and his teachings, this book, the Quran, was actually kept in its true form, so you don't get any false information when you're reading it. And I'm not gonna you don't need to take my word for it that Islam is the truth. This is what I believe. But the question of why are we here and where did we come from and where we're going is the most important question in the world. And to live in blissful ignorance and to say, oh, okay, I'm here for no reason. This is just, this is all just a coincidence. And there are more than half the world's population believing in this God, the God of Abraham, and you're making an assumption that they're all just wrong. I mean, you can just, my advice is to do some studying, even of different religions, of Christianity, of Judaism, and of Islam too, and of other religions if you want to as well, and to try to find out who God is, because God is not talking from the sky to us. So the only way that he could have, given us information about himself and made it clear what he expects from us is sending prophets or messengers or people that he inspires. Now, there are a lot of different religions, but my belief and the belief of more than half the world is that this God, the God of Abraham, is God. And the thing they differed upon is, who the prophets that were which prophets were truly from him or not. And it makes a big difference because, ultimately the Quran has a lot of statements about God that describe God in ways the old scriptures didn't. So if you don't believe, if you're a Christian and you don't believe in, Islam, or you're a Jew and you don't believe in Christianity, you have different beliefs about who God is altogether, because He's the same God, but some of His attributes and some things about Him and some things that He expects from people and what He's commanded His nation, you get lost upon. So to study and to look for who God is and for what God expects from you and to find evidences. I mean, inshallah, as you go along in your studies, you can find evidences and you can come to a conclusion on what you want to believe yourself. But to just assume that to make an assumption based on what you don't know, that there is no God, or that God is just, everyone has a relationship, and the God, God didn't define Himself to anybody, that's an assumption. You can do studying, and you can, inshallah, you can come to a conclusion on your own. And the Quran, in my belief, has a lot of evidences from it being from that God, the God of Abraham, and it has a lot of evidences for it being in its integral form, and from being from the creator of everything. And that's, I had my particular journey was different. I had a lot of spiritual experiences when I started praying and I started worshiping my family. I wasn't actually a very deeply practicing Muslim my whole life. I believed in God always. I started really practicing the religion when I was 19, and then I started, getting more invested in it and studying more and praying a lot. And then eventually I started having a lot of spiritual experiences that guided me. But the Quran, one thing that happened was when I read the Quran, whenever I had a doubt because of something it said that bothered me, eventually through studies, the questions, not all of them, but many of the questions got answered about, who God is and what God wants from me, and about this book being true. And, yeah, so I advise people to study, to look for God and to try to find who He is. And my advice as a Muslim and as someone who came to this conclusion through spiritual experiences that were very clear, guiding me to this, and also through actual study and evidence from the book itself, I would advise people to study Islam. And I actually want to talk about, what faith is, because there is a misconception about faith that exists in modern society that I've seen, and I've seen it very prevalent in the West. And it's the idea that faith is basically just to believe in something because you believe in it. Faith is based on evidence. The idea of faith is that once you have seen a sufficient amount of evidence to prove that something is from God and that that this is from God, then with that evidence, you say, okay, this is from God. Now, what I don't understand about it, it's okay. I accept it anyways because I know it's from God and He knows better than me. That's faith. It's to realize something's from God, and then if something doesn't add up afterwards, you don't expect that you have to know everything. It's fine to ask questions. It's fine to study. It's fine to try to answer the questions. But the idea is, once you've proven something is from God, whether you understand it or not, it's upon you to accept it. And it's fine to ask questions and try to understand it. But sometimes God does things that are difficult to understand, and that's just the reality. We're only humans, and God, He's the creator of everything. It's possible that He created our brains without the capacity to understand everything that He does. But faith is not just my parents told me this, so I believe in it, or I was taught this growing up, or the preacher told me this, or that. The faith is to discern with evidence that something is coming from God, whether it's from your own personal experiences or from deep study of whatever doctrine you're reading, and also from both. And once you discern that this cannot be coming from the devil, or that this is not fabricated by man, and that this is from God, and that becomes very clear, then you might still have questions, things that are not left that you haven't answered. Faith is to say, I've discerned this comes from God, so now I accept it, whether I agree with what it says or not, or whether I can understand everything. That's what faith is, and that's a misconception about faith I wanted to clear up, because some people they have a confusion about faith. They think that people who believe in God are just idiots. They're just like they just have faith in something that they have no reason to believe in. No, that's not what faith is. To discern something comes from God and accept His commands, and to believe in something even when you don't understand it completely. Like Abraham. If anyone knows the story of Abraham, which is a very famous story, basically he was tested by God extensively. He knew his revelations were coming from God. They had become very clearly, it became very clear God had proven everything to him. And then he got a test that made no sense to him, and that was so difficult to execute and had no real reason other than to test his faith. And that test that came, it was basically God commanded him in a dream to sacrifice his son. And this is not like us. I mean, me and you, the devil is there. We see visions, we see dreams. Maybe the devil sends us a dream and we can't tell us from God. I'm not telling you to go sacrifice your son if you see a dream. We have, we are susceptible to the devil's influence. This was a prophet who had clear guidance from God, and he got a guidance, and it told him this command that was basically to sacrifice his son. He knew it wasn't from the devil. He knew it wasn't from himself. It was from God, and he had no idea how this could be good, because God commands people not to kill, and he also had no idea how it was a very difficult thing to do for him. But he trusted that God had a reason to give him this command, even when he didn't understand it, because he knew it came from God. And when he was about to kill his son, God stopped him and said, this was a test, and he blessed him afterwards immensely, because he passed the test and he had faith and he believed when he didn't understand, because he knew it was from God. And that's an example of faith that comes when you accept something because you understand it's from God and you have evidence for that, not because your parents taught you, not because someone. You have to see the evidence. You have to actually have evidence for it. And yeah, so that's an example of faith, and that's what faith really is. And disbelief is for whatever reason, when the truth becomes clear to you that you don't want the truth because you have a desire greater than the truth, or you have arrogance in you and you think that you think that you're on a moral high ground to go away from truth because you don't like what truth is. Truth is the most important thing. Allah's name is Al-Haq, the truth. Truth is the most important thing in the world. And a lesson that life teaches you very clearly is that we don't make reality what we want it to be. Like you can do things and you can try your best to make things happen, but sometimes, you can end up getting hit by a car and paralyzed, and that's reality whether you want it to be or not. Truth is a reality, and you got to know that if you walk into traffic when there's cars coming, that you're basically, you're putting yourself in danger of suffering, whether you believe that or not. Reality is a very heavy thing, and to be in conflict with reality is arrogance, and it's also really weakness to have a desire greater than your desire to be upon truth. So to reject truth is what kufr is, what disbelief is. And also it's called ingratitude. Why is it called ingratitude? Because at least in my religion, when God calls you and he tells you to worship him, he is giving you, he's basically saying, I have a good opportunity for you. This opportunity is that I am merciful, I'm forgiving, I'm kind, and I also have a punishment and anger. And my mercy is greater than my anger, and you have a good opportunity to go to heaven if you accept this religion and you accept, belief and faith, and you do the commands. And even the good thing is, God is forgiving. So even if you don't execute all the commands, or even if you have weakness and you just accept faith and you do whatever amount you do, you still might go to heaven even if you don't keep your integrity, because God can still forgive you if you want a relationship with him. It's not guaranteed. I mean, if you don't want to live a righteous life, then you still might lose everything. But there's hope for heaven, even if you continue doing wrong, if you at least acknowledge God for who he is and accept that he has these commands over you, even if you don't execute them. Although the best thing to do is to accept God for who he is, accept his commands or what they are, and execute them, and be a righteous person, and only make mistakes and weakness, and not actually be determined to do wrong things, because that way you've kept your integrity and heaven is for you. But there's hope with belief and with faith, and when you are confronted with the truth and you accept it, whether you're too weak to execute all the commands or not, accepting faith and accepting reality has no downsides. You are automatically worse off and doing something irrational when truth comes to you, and because you are too weak to accept that you're going to meet God one day, or you're too and you want to continue doing things without being worried, you're too weak to deal with that maybe I'm just going to do these things, but at least I'm going to accept this is what it is. It doesn't have any benefit to you, other than, or you have arrogance and you don't like the truth, you don't like reality, and you rather turn away from what God says because you feel like you have a more high ground. And ultimately, God doesn't do injustice to people, so it's not even, it's a martyrdom to hellfire for nothing. It's not even, you're not going to win, and you're not right anyways. God doesn't do injustice to people. So Yeah, basically, accepting faith has no downside. It only has hope and possibility for you. Turning away hurts you. So faith is like it makes sense. It makes sense to accept faith, and it's also ingratitude because God is giving you a good opportunity with all this hope, and you're saying no, I don't want that. I just want to keep doing what I'm doing, and I don't want to even if I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, I don't even want to think about that. So I'm not going to accept it. So now that being said, God gives people a lot of chances, and Pharaoh had to see many evidences and proofs before he was actually punished. So I'm not saying you heard me talk in a video or watched one video about something Islamic and then you didn't believe in it right away, and now you're a disbeliever. I'm just saying that after extensive studying and research, and there is an obligation upon people not to be blissfully ignorant. The question of why we're here, where are we going, and who is God is the most important question, and not to ask that is something that is blameworthy in itself. To actually not try to figure out who God is and to just ignore Him and not give Him His due diligence it's not a good thing at all. So yeah, faith is advantageous, and faith to believe it won't hurt you. It won't hurt you at all, and it opens up all the possibilities. And it's ungrateful to turn away from God and to just spit in His face when He offers you an opportunity, as opposed to accepting it and going full out, or accepting it and investing whatever you're willing to invest with hope that you'll get a return on that investment. It's just that's what kufr is. That's why it's called ingratitude. That's why it's called rejection. It's an irrational thing, and it doesn't help you, and it only harms you. And yeah, man, that's basically what I wanted to say about what faith is, and what what kufr is, and why it's so wrong to go into disbelief, because it leads you it's only harms you. And I'm sorry, I lost my notes for this video. Someone did something with them, so I just need a moment to recall where I'm going with this next part of this. One of the things that I wanted to actually point out was that I wanted to give people a reference for the Quran, because the Quran, it there's one so my one of the big things I wanted to advise people to do was to read the Quran and just see what you think, to take a look and see. The thing that I found also, like I said, I read it and I had a lot of questions and a lot of things that I doubted. As I started getting more and more studied, I started seeing more things that kind of, it made it clear that it was true to me, and my questions got answered. But and the thing is, the Quran ultimately is a book that speaks to your heart. It speaks to your heart, and it's maybe some of the verses are going to talk about like something really that won't relate to you. That's talking about like the amount of the amount of inheritance that your children should receive and stuff like that. Very specific things. But there are some verses that talk about the next life, heaven and hell, and gratitude, and what are the favors of Allah upon you, and those verses and the verses about like the way that people hurt themselves and the way that people succeed, and these verses sometimes they have an effect on your heart and they move you, and you can feel almost like it's coming from something supernatural the way that it talks to you. And that's the way a lot of people find guidance. I feel like the Quran has an effect on the heart when you read it. And but there's also a few things that I want. Well, first of all, I want the surah that I advise people to read and listen to is called surah. It's Surah Zumar, Surah Az-Zumar or Surah Zumar. I forgot the Arabic name. It's the troops, and it's it's only 20 minutes or 15 minutes to read, and it covers most of like a lot of the Quranic topics and the topics of the religion in a very broad way. And I find that for people who are new to Islam and wanting to study it, this is a pretty good chapter to start reading. But I advise people to read the whole Quran. The Quran is really it's great. It has an immense ability to affect your heart. But there's a few things actually that I want to talk about from the Quran. That this is not the normal way that people find guidance, but this is some interesting things that I found, and I lost my notes, like I said, so I don't have all of them. I'm just gonna go over a few of them quickly that I remember. that were, you know, interesting points that I was like, oh man, this is a really cool thing that is, you know, a pretty big evidence for this from this for this book coming from something special, from something supernatural. And one of them, this one was the one that really shocked me. I found that the the words land and water, or land and sea, were mentioned. Like, I forgot the number because I don't have the notes, and you can look this up. The uh, Quran numerical miracle, ocean and land, and you'll find it on Google, inshallah. But the number of times the land or earth is mentioned, or the number of times land is mentioned, and the number of times sea is mentioned. If you divide the numbers, you get the exact proportion of land to sea on the earth. I forgot what the number was, but it was like down to 1%, the exact proportion of land to sea on the earth. And that was really strange. I was like, oh man, that's interesting, man, that they had the number of times exactly like that. Another thing is that the word forgiveness is mentioned exactly twice as many times as the word punishment. I think the word day was mentioned 365 times. The word month was mentioned 12 times. You know, the in the chapter, there's a prophet. The prophet that lived the longest, his name was Noah, or Nuh. Maybe you know his story from the flood. It is said he lived for 950 years. And this is one of the only prophets, I believe, in the Quran where Allah mentioned how long they lived. He said he lived 950 years. And there's one of the chapters of the Quran is named after him. It's Surah Noah, Surah Nuh. And it talks about and it's basically his discourse to his people, and his talking to God afterwards about how they're not listening to him. And this chapter I think it had exactly 950 words, and like it's mentioned in the other chapter that he lived for 950 years, and it's exactly 950 words in that chapter. There were a few things like that I saw in the chapter Surah Yusuf, so the chapter about Joseph, which is the only chapter in the Quran that's actually a full story of a prophet from beginning to end. I found that like something like this was really interesting. They were able to divide it into either 12 or 14 sections. I forget which one, and they found that the first and the last section directly correlated. The second and the second and the next one from that directly correlated. The next one directly correlated, and it happened down to the middle. And that I saw that prevalent in many of the chapters of the Quran. This interesting ring structure of the Quran where the topics, they match the first one and the last one together like really really amazingly. So there's this is not really this is not something that I would actually normally say is like the evidence for the Quran being true. The way the Quran becomes apparent to you, for me at least, is from reading it and having the verses move you, because the verses have a really interesting effect on you, and it's really a special thing. And also one more thing that I found interesting was that there's a verse in it, and it talks about a battle that happened between the Romans and the Persians at the time, I think, and it actually uses the word that happened in the lowest land. That's the word it used. And they found that land, I think it's right next to the Dead Sea, is actually where the battle happened, is actually the lowest part of the earth compared to sea level, and they called it the lowest land for some reason in the Quran. It was something that people didn't identify until recently. So there's some things in the Quran. There's many more. I had notes, but I lost them. But there's some things in the structure of the Quran and the number of words that I mentioned that are really it's really precise, and it's kind of an interesting thing. But my advice for people, don't take my word for it. Don't, I'm not telling people to take my say so and say that the Quran is true and that Islam is true. I had my own I had a really intense number of spiritual experiences over the last few years where I started seeing a lot of signs, and I had a lot of really crazy visions and dreams about things, and a lot of really intense experiences basically that led me to the conclusion that I'm at, as well as the actual studying. A big part of my journey was a spiritual journey. So I'm not telling you to take my word for it, but I advise people to read the Quran and try to just try to see what you get from it. Maybe you'll find guidance too, like I did. And the Quran is something that is really special. Alhamdulillah, we believe as Muslims that the Quran is the word of God in its exact integral form in Arabic, and people translate it, and you can get some good out of the translations. Inshallah, yeah, reading the Quran is really amazing. And that's all that I want to talk about today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Assalamu alaikum and bye bye.